Ladies and gentlemen, you are tuned into another episode of the Paul Leslie Hour. And now your host, Paul Leslie.
Hey, it's me. You're tuned into the Paul Leslie Hour. This is the second installment of A Celebration of Paul Williams, our tribute to singer, songwriter, actor, and recovery advocate, Paul Williams. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are glad you're here. This is the Paul Leslie Hour's interview with composer, pianist, arranger, and producer Kenny Ascher. He's composed some wonderful music. In fact, one of the most beloved songs around, Rainbow Connection, with lyrics by the great Paul Williams. We're celebrating Paul Williams in this little series. So, Kenny Ascher, how are you?
I'm good. I'm glad to talk to you. Paul is an old friend as well as a collaborator, so I'm delighted to. We've shared some wonderful times together socially, and just we're like, sort of coast to coast brothers in a way. We've had a wonderful time writing together. We have a certain simpatico about our aesthetic, and so it's always enjoyable to work with him.
I want to get into Paul Williams, but for just a few moments. We were talking off the air just a couple minutes ago. I'm a fan of the Woody Herman Orchestra, and one of our friends and listeners, John Paradise, is also a fanatic. I'm hoping you can tell us about this experience that you had with the Woody Herman Orchestra.
Well, let me see. I had just graduated college, and this would have been in '66. And I was all set to go back to Atlanta, and I had a gig lined up with a singer. We had a nightclub gig, and we also were going to do a 10 o'clock in the morning local talk show on television. So I was really looking forward to it. It was like a dream gig for me. I was, 21 years old, and then the telephone rang. Just, I would say, about 3 weeks before starting this Atlanta gig. And it was Woody Herman's manager. And apparently what had happened is I had subbed at the last minute for a piano player with the Frank Foster Orchestra, Frank being famous for Shiny Stockings and working with the Count Basie Orchestra. And Frank had subbed with Woody's band the previous weekend, and they were looking for a piano player because their regular guy was going to leave. And Frank recommended me, and make a long story a little shorter, the telephone rang, and it was Woody's manager, and he asked me if I was able to work with Woody for the summer, because I was going back to school in the fall. I was getting a master's degree, and I said I was available for about 3 months in the summer, and so somehow my dad helped and got me out of the other gig for Atlanta, which I felt sort of weird about leaving, but like my dad said, I really couldn't turn down Woody Herman. It was a dream gig because I'd heard that band when I was 6 years old. So this was a dream come true for me, and Woody was delightful and helpful, and I had a great time with that band. And of course, being 21 and seeing parts of the country, and eventually the following January when we went to Europe, which was my first time over there. So I got to see some of the world and a lot of the United States, and play some great music with a very good leader. Very, very, I just really liked Woody very much. I think he was generally well liked by his players.
I had to ask about that. There's just been so many great recordings from the Woody Herman Orchestra that I've enjoyed. So we were talking in the beginning, and I was introducing that you were the composer of Rainbow Connection, which you wrote with Paul Williams. Can you tell us about the first time you met Paul Williams?
Yes. I was originally playing piano for Paul. My friend David Spinoza had made just an old-fashioned love song album with Paul on A&M Records, and Paul was coming into New York to do the Tonight Show. Now, Paul at that time had not performed. He wasn't really a performer. he was writing songs with Roger Nichols, and all of a sudden he got a call to go on the Tonight Show. Now at that time, the Tonight Show was still based in New York City, so Paul came in and we had a rehearsal, and David Spinoza called me and hired me as a piano player, and a drummer named Herbie Lavelle, and a bass player named Russell George. We had a quick rehearsal of 2 tunes, and Paul went on the air, which his first gig performing, you can imagine, for I don't know how many millions of people watching The Tonight Show. It was amazing. And so I stayed with, basically I was a pianist for Paul. And then we did some gigs at the bitter end in New York. We did the Main Point in Philadelphia. And then we went to Japan. And we ended up talking one afternoon. We did a couple of concerts in Japan and some radio programs. And Paul and we were just sitting around talking in the afternoon before the concert one day, and we started talking about our favorite songwriters, and we discovered we shared so many of the same favorite songwriters. Just to mention a few: James Taylor, Paul McCartney, Stevie Wonder, Cole Porter, Gershwin, obviously, all the great American songbook writers. And, we just had a nice conversation about all these people. And then we did our gig in Japan, came back to the States, and got another gig working in England. And my work permit didn't come through. We were supposed to do TV shows and then record in London with Paul's producer Michael Jackson, not the famous Michael Jackson, but sort of another. Michael is a producer that produced Paul's first 2 albums on A&M. And we went to London, and the guitar player and I, who accompanied Paul to London, our work permits didn't come through. And being very strict about this, we could not play the TV shows with Paul. So what had happened is we had to we went to rehearsals. We explained to the musicians how this music went, but I could not touch a piano. I guess whatever union rules applied in those kind of cases. I could verbally explain things to the piano player, but I could not actually show him by playing. But we got through it, and one afternoon, Paul and I guess we woke up and we went to an antique fair in the morning in Bermondsey, which is a section outside of London. And we came back to the hotel. We went to the Inn on the Park for breakfast. And as it so happened, Sammy Kahn was in London at the time. And so we said hello to Sammy Kahn at the restaurant at the Inn on the Park, and then came back to where we were staying. And there was a piano in Paul's room, and Paul said, "Why don't we just, write a song or something, because I couldn't play and I couldn't work, so to speak." And I said, "Gee, you want to write a song?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "Play me some stuff you've written." So I had played him a few melodies, some songs I had written on my own, and we ended up writing a song, our first song. Which was not the Great American Ballad, which I was very excited when Paul asked me to write a song with him. But our first song was a song named Nilsson Sings Newman, because we had previously, the night before, we're talking about two more of our favorite writers, Randy Newman and Harry Nilsson. So I said to Paul, I said, when you go on television, you sing these romantic songs, and then you go on the panel and you're very funny. So I said, let's write a funny song. And so we wrote 52 seconds is the length of the song, called Nilsson Sings Newman. And Paul, was written to be in the style of Harry Nilsson and Randy Newman. And Paul said, "Well, why do you want to call it Nilsson Sings Newman?" I said, "Because that's sort of part of the joke, because in those days when you bought LPs, as you probably remember, they would always have advertisements for other LPs on the back of the album, and then you'd say, if you enjoyed this record, you'd probably enjoy this one." And so I said, when the album, if you ever record this, people will pick up the album and say, "Gee, that's the name of a song? That's the name of an album," because Harry Nilsson had done a record called Nilsson Sings Newman. And then I started thinking, almost in a cinematographic way. I said, well, after playing this very just rhythm section, very Randy Newman-ish, Harry Nilsson-ish kind of song, very funny lyrics, I said, what would happen is if we were listening in a theater to this song, and all of a sudden, you know how the curtains would open up in the theater and it would be CinemaScope or VistaVision, and you'd go from this really basic Harry Nilsson, Randy Newman song into a string intro. And Paul looked at me and he said, well, doing what? And I said, well, it was an orchestra. It would be an orchestra, not just strings. And I played the intro to You and Me Against the World. And Paul looked at me, and because Paul is he's also very into the movies like I am, and he sang the first notes with the lyric, You and Me Against the World, which we were now off to the races. I mean, we went from never having written together to writing a funny song. Now we were writing right away, Nilsson Sings Newman. And we basically structured that song that afternoon very quickly. The melodies, the chords, everything. Paul wrote much of the lyric. He didn't write all the lyric. And then we wrote another song that same afternoon. Again, we finessed it later, but we also wrote a song called You Know Me, where Paul, I think the verse, Paul wanted to write a verse for a song, which very few people do. And he said, sentimental fellow, sometimes over mellow, writing verses no one plans to do. I know I'm no Cole Porter, I'm noticeably shorter. Do I deserve to have someone like you? And again, it was picking up on the funny side of Paul, but very serious. Paul to me was like a Johnny Mercer type of writer. He could write wonderfully colloquial lyrics, and he could write beautiful, absolutely elegant lyrics. And, because of his sense of humor, he could go from one side of himself to the other very, very, very eloquently, I thought. So we really basically wrote Nilsson Sings Newman and You and Me Against the World and You Know Me that afternoon. Paul was finishing. He would work on lyrics, and I would finesse a little bit here and there. And then his his producer couldn't fly. He had a cold or an ear infection or something, and he couldn't fly because we were supposed to do an album in London when we were there, and Michael couldn't come over, so they canceled the session. And Paul said, well, why don't you produce the record and we'll just go to L.A. and we'll do it. And that's what ended up happening. Well, a few months later, I flew out to L.A. and we started that album, which was the Here Comes Inspiration album, for which we wrote the song Inspiration. So it was, basically going from never having written together to, it reminded me, I don't know how many people are going to remember this, but there was a show on TV called the Colgate Comedy Hour, and Martin Lewis did a week, and Eddie Cantor did, and I forget some of the others, but Donald O'Connor also did a skit with another comedian whose name's Sid. I can't remember Sid's last name, and one of their skits was based on a songwriting team. And they pretended to write songs and get inspired. And I said to Paul, that's like what we're doing here. I mean, we're winging it here. We were literally just sailing with inspiration. We really were. And then on that record, I had previously arranged for an Alice Tully Hall concert here, which we did with Paul's rhythm section and a string quartet. I had arranged Rainy Days and Mondays for him, a song he wrote with wonderful song he wrote with Roger Nichols, and I wrote a string quartet arrangement for that, and we ended up doing that on the album. And I wrote a lot of the orchestrations and the arrangements for that record, and then the songs like Inspiration, You and Me Against the World, You Know Me, Nilsson Sings Newman appeared on that record. And then, I don't know how long it was before our second album A Little Bit of Love was at least a half a year later, or maybe, maybe 6 to 9 months later. I can't remember. But it was a wonderful, very inspired period of both of our lives.
One time I found myself down in Key West, Florida, and I was seated with Jerry Jeff Walker. We were outside
Oh, my goodness.
looking at the water, and I asked him, it was towards the end of the interview, and I said, what's a great song? Like, tell us, what songs really inspire you? Not just ones that you wrote. And he said, I'll tell you, Rainbow Connection.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'm hoping you can tell us, how have you seen, because that's a very special song, I think. How have you seen that song affect people?
It has been a very rewarding experience. I do a gig at Jazz Nightclub when it was open. It's obviously not open during the pandemic, but there's a jazz club in New York where we do a Friday evening set with the big band from 5 to 7 or 5:30 to 7 on Fridays. A wonderful gig, and occasionally they ask me to play Rainbow Connection on the piano, and it is so fantastic. People come up and tell me what that song has meant to them for their lives. It's apparently meant so much to so many people that when I play it, people come up to the stage after we're done, and they tell me how much the song has meant to them. The one drummer friend of mine told me that, let me see. Well, of course, he's a generation younger than I am, so he would have been a young person when that song was first heard in the Muppet Movie. And he said, "Do you know what that song is?" And I said, "No. What does it mean to you?" And he said, he felt that that song was the song of his generation, which just really put me away when he said that. It has been very satisfying and very rewarding, as I say. It is. With different people recording it, Kenny Loggins, and there's a Willie Nelson version, and all the different people have done it. And Kermit's version is obviously the classic. Not the others that I appreciate. Everybody and anybody who has ever recorded it or sung it on a record or on a CD or for a cabaret gig or in a concert, but everybody comes up and asks about Kermit doing it, and I usually explain that it was the last song we wrote for the Muppet Movie, and we'd been working very hard, and we were sitting down to dinner, and Paul's wife looked at us, and he says, "You guys look tired." And I said, "Well, we're looking for this thing. We're looking for this. We want to write a song and pay tribute to rainbows, like Look to the Rainbow from Finian's Rainbow and Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz." And Paul had written a line for a song called I Won't Last a Day Without You, where he wrote a line, "There's no getting over that rainbow." So this was Paul and my idea that we wanted to pay tribute to songs about rainbows. But we were very frustrated because we had written all the other songs for the movie, but we hadn't written this one. And I said, "Well, I know it's going to be a waltz. I know it's going to be in 3/4. And Paul said, "How do you know that?" And I said, "Well, I just think it'd be very charming to have Kermit play his banjo, and it would be a waltz." But we didn't know what we were going to write yet. So consequently, Paul's wife looked at us both, and she said, "Well, you guys are looking for the Rainbow Connection." And we were having dinner. We got up from the dinner table. We went into Paul's music room, and Paul said an interesting thing to me. He says, "Take your index finger and play a melody, and don't play chords. Just play the melody." And I played da 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 ba da 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 bo da. Excuse my pitches, but Paul said, "That's it." And again, because of our inspiration working together, this song all of a sudden, I can't say it wrote itself, but it came out very quickly. And it has been, I don't know, it's very hard to describe the satisfaction that we both get from the reactions that we get from people. And this goes back, I can't remember, it was either 74, 75 or something, maybe 77. I can't remember the exact date when the movie came out, but this goes now, that's close to 25 plus, that's 40, I can't believe it's almost 45 years ago. And it's been a wonderful blessing for both of us.
We're talking with Kenny Ascher, composer and friend of Paul Williams. We're celebrating Paul Williams, who's turning 80 years old. What does Paul Williams mean to you?
Well, as I said, we are like brothers. We are. He's out in L.A. and I'm here in New York. This is how our lives have been. This is how we lived our lives. After we wrote the Muppet Movie, we had been working on our careers for most of our adult life, and decided it was time to have families. So, I came back to New York, and as a matter of fact, my wife and I were expecting our first child while we were working on the Muppet Movie. And we both went off and had families, and when we talk on the phone, it is like no time has passed. We hit the ground running, and he certainly, his generosity and his kindness and his humanity have influenced me very, very much in my lifetime. I think about him quite a bit. I love the songs that we've written together, and I love the songs that he's written by himself, and I love the songs that he's written lyrics for with other people. I think he's a giant songwriter, obviously in the Songwriters Hall of Fame. But we have a nice human connection. It's certainly he's certainly an important person in my life as a friend and as a working partner. I also, to use a song title, he's very inspiring to me. His sense of humor and his sense of romanticism and our mutual love of the movies and all these things that we share. I only wish it upon other songwriters that they have that same respect and feeling for each other.
Well, Kenny Ascher, I really, really appreciate you contributing to this series.
Oh, you're very welcome.
It's been great to talk to you, and I hope at some point we can talk again. I know there is so much more to the Kenny Ascher story.
Well, I should say, I can't put it in the past tense. I'm having a wonderful life, musically and otherwise, and I enjoy my various hats that I've had during my musical career. It's interesting to look back upon my career and see the different avenues where I've gone, and working in advertising with commercials and jingles and a few of the movies and the record dates and all. But we can talk about that in the future. I'd be glad to do it.
I would love it. I would absolutely love it. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and until next time.
Great, Paul. Thank you very much for asking.
It's an honor, sir.
Okay.
All right.
Be well.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Paul Leslie Hour. Hosted, written, and produced by Paul Leslie. Intro theme song, Alexander's Ragtime Band, written by Irving Berlin, performed by Dan Barrett. Outro scatting G Things, improvised, performed, and produced by John Goodwin. Until next time.
Goodbye.